In this course, we're going to be building a ChatGPT clone using Laravel 11 and Livewire 3. We're going to be using Livewire Stream as well, which is a function that enables to stream the response back using Livewire. So as you can see, we can actually ask ChatGPT Model 3.5 or Model 4, and it can generate PHP code and highlight it just as if it was on the ChatGPT app, so it doesn't look all weird with no highlighting. We can even ask ChatGPT Model 4 as well, and it will automatically set the title along with allowing you to get it to memorize previous text you've had in the same conversation. So that's actually all we're doing for this course, but it's a lot going on behind it. So let's take a look into this application and see how this works out. Okay, let's get started with creating a new Laravel app called ChatGPT. And inside this app, we want to use Jetstream. We want to use Livewire. We don't care about API dark mode. And we want to use Pest, and we are going to not initialize a GitHub repository. We're also going to be using PostgreSQL here. And we want the migrations later on due to the config not matching up with my database configuration, so it will fail if I try to do that. And after that, we just need to head into our application. So in here, I've just modified my configuration to match my database. I'm going to go in and create a new table called ChatGPT. Just like that. And I'm going to open up the table just to check that it works. Perfect. So what I want to go ahead and do now is I just want to migrate everything just to double check that everything is working fine, which it is, which is great. And after that, what we want to go ahead and do is we want to head into our with the PHP folder and create a route. So we want to create this route called chat. But first we're going to create the Livewire component. So let's go in and create a Livewire component in here called chat. And we want to put it inside a pages folder just to keep it more consistent in here. So now that we've created this component here, let's go in and use that in our route. Alright, so that's now sorted. And let's make sure we import this as well. So let's go into OpenAI Laravel Package and run compose and install. So once that's installed, let's go ahead and make sure we also run the PHP artisan command to install this package. This will then go ahead and publish the API configuration in the env file. So all I have to do in here is I just have to make sure I copy it or create a new API key in here. So once heading in here, what I can do is I can go down and I can copy and paste in the API key, and that should be all what you need for this end. Alright, so now that's done, we are now able to head into our terminal. In here, we're going to be creating a model called conversation, and make sure we have a migration set for that. And inside the create conversations model, we want to have a few things in here. As a starter, we want to make sure we have a string in here, which is going to be called title. And we want to make sure this is nullable, so that by default it isn't set, so that it gets generated by ChatGPT. We want to make sure we relate it to a user. And we want to make sure it's constrained to the user's table and cascade on delete. And we also want a UID for it. And let's migrate that. And then head into the user model. Inside the user model. So in here we want to create a relationship between the conversation model and the user model. So let's make a has many relationship and return this as many, and it belongs to a conversation. So let's go ahead and also make sure that we have the Livewire component in here, which we're going to put inside the components folder and call this chatbot. So inside here, we just want to, sidebar. Inside sidebar, we just want to go ahead and make sure we copy some code. And we want to basically just put this code in here. We're just going to basically iterate through the conversations once we have some, and also allow us to generate a new chat. So for now, I'm just going to go ahead and create a function in here called public function new. And let's go ahead and make sure we also publish the layout. And then inside app.play.php, where we just publish this layout, let's go ahead and make sure we copy the original file in there. Just like that. And then in here, we just want to make sure we load into Sidebar. So we're just going to use Livewire components.sidebar. And that's it there. So what we can go ahead and do now is run npm. And let's take a look inside our browser as well. And that looks great. Alright, so with that sorted, let's head into our sidebar again. And in here, we want to go ahead and item 1 just to make sure that it's hooked up to the right-click function. Alright, with that sorted, we should now be able to go in here and make sure that we can create a conversation. So all we really should do here is we need to go ahead and call the user and then grab the conversation from there and then create it. So that should be it. But however, this won't work before we add in the UUID upon creation in the conversation model. So inside the conversation model in here, what we want to make sure is we, upon booting and creating it, we want to make sure we basically store the UUID. So we don't even have to pass that through. We don't have to generate that on our end every time we want to create a new conversation. Instead, we're just doing it from the model class. So let's go ahead and, upon creating, store this ID. Make sure we import it. And with that imported, we should now be able to head in and actually create a conversation. Alright, so let's go in now to the new function here. No, sorry, into the database and browse as well. Just make sure we can create a new chat. Upon creating a new chat, let's see if it gets stored in the database. So I'm just going to head into /chat. Create a new conversation. And there we go. We have a new conversation stored in the database. So with that sorted, what we should be able to do in the sidebar is actually iterate through them all. So we can just allow this code in now, and we can then basically see each individual conversation in there. So we just need to have the conversation pass through in here, so we make sure we actually load them all from the user. So upon mounting, we just want to load the conversations. So we can essentially do this using this conversation, and we set that to conversations are equal to of user conversations. However, we also want to make sure there's a small limit on it later on, and also at some point we want to make sure that we can just double check we have the conversations. Perfect. So what we can go ahead and do now is we can go ahead and basically grab a limit and then get them in all of them as well, just like that. We still have the conversation, so the code seems to work fine. So now we just need to make sure we have chat.show defined as a route. So inside web.php, we're going to create a new class in here where we're going to basically take through the conversation UUID, and basically that's going to load up the chat page. and we just want to call that chat.show. And the other one we want to have is a function where we automatically, upon entering chat, create a new chat. Because in that case, we assume the person wants to start a new conversation. So we can just create a new conversation just like we did inside the sidebar class, and then redirect to that conversation. Just as if you went to ChatGPT's website, you would do the same thing. You would create a new conversation unless you load a previously created one. So with that sorted, we can now go in and see our previous conversations. Every time we go to /chat, it will create a new conversation, which is perfect. So it works just as intended. And you can see the all stored in the database as well. Let's just go ahead and delete the other one so we can tidy the database up a bit. And outside of that, let's now head into the chat page here. And inside here, let's add in some classes. So we want to set this as relative, hyphen, and also add some padding as well. And we also make sure we set overflow here as well so that it doesn't scroll. So with that sorted, let's go ahead and add a padding of 5 in a separate div and make a Livewire component, which we're going to call chatbot. And then this chatbot component we then want to load in here. So we want to just say Livewire, and we want to make sure we move this into the components folder as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and make sure that's moved in there. You probably already spotted this error. Make sure we modify the view file as well. And then add this in there. Perfect. So with that sorted, let's head back in and make sure we go into the components, chatbot one, and add in the conversation we had, which we can just add in like that. And inside the chat component, we can then make sure we communicate with the web.php file and retrieve that UUID we get in. So we can actually just get this by saying public conversation, and in this case we actually don't need the mounting. So let's go ahead and get rid of that. So this should work. Now we should be able to essentially get this information. So inside this class, what we can then go ahead and do is make sure we add in some classes. So let's go ahead and say, and then also we want to pass in some X data in here. And in this X data, we want to have text. We want to set that to null. We want to have a temporary message, which we are going to set again to nothing at first, and we want to check if it's sending as well, and we set that to false as default. Temporary message is basically the message we're sending from the user, and then in here we want to have a class and the URL. Basically inside this URL we want to have some spacing, and we want to make sure we also add in a minimum height. And then we want to make sure we have an li in here where we have some spacing again. And we want to make this flex. So basically we want to have one message at the start and one at the end. So this is going to be the user message we're going to just display here as a starter. So we're just going to have this as flex justify start. And then in here we just want to pass through a div with a class in here where we're going to have the background color for the message and text black, and we're going to set some maximum width, and we're going to have it rounded, and we want to show you some message class in here as well, which we can get from app.css. So this message class is just going to have the following style. And we also want to make sure we have the highlights here for paragraphs and so on inside the message class. And in here we just want to make sure we add in the image and with the username in there as well in the alt text. So let's go ahead and just start this up a bit so it looks a bit nice on the code editor. And make sure we get the span as well, tidy it up as well, and then just pass in some random text just to see that it works. And if we head into chat, you can then see that we are displaying this text, hello world. So with that sorted, let's also go into our app.css file. And in here, what we want to do is we want to create a class called message bubble, and then we will add in the different configuration in there. And that looks to be fine. So all we just want to make sure of here is actually three. So basically what we should be able to do now is we should be able to go into our chatbot page. And we need to rename this message instead of message bubble. And there you go. So that's it. And then let's go ahead and create one example here as well for the AI. But before we do that, let's go ahead and make sure we make a model in here called message. So inside this model, we want to go into the create message as well, and we also want to make sure that we set protected guarded to an empty array, and we want to make sure this relates to conversation. And then inside create message table, in here, what we want to make sure of is that we have table and foreign ID relating it to a conversation. And we want to make sure it's constrained and cascade on delete. And on top of that, we also want to have the text where we have the content. And we want to check in this case as well if it is sent by the user or if it's sent by the AI, which is just going to be its user message, which will be AI/user, depending on the circumstances. So that should be everything we need there. So let's go ahead and migrate it and check in the database. And you can see we have now got the ability to essentially set it to conversation, which is great. So now that we have that sorted, we should now be able to go in as well and create some fake messages and then iterate through them and just see how it goes. So let's take a look at how that works. Make sure you pass through the different IDs there. Table plus is a bit sensitive for that. And there we go. So now we obviously still need to make sure that we have this ID set in. So if we go into chat bot here, let's go ahead and make sure we actually iterate through it. And then when that's now been iterated through it, we can now go ahead and essentially create the area where we're going to submit the text message. So we need a form in here, and we just need, in this case, to have in some classes here. So MT5 and space Y3. Then we need in here a text area and a select form, where this is going to be model, and it's going to be related to the model we want to have responding to us. So in this case, we could have model 3 or 4 respond, and I've just put the value in as the value we want to pass through to the API endpoint. And this is the classes we need here. And then we need a text area. In this text area, we want to just call this message. And in here, we just want to pass through the ID. And we don't need the column specified. We just need a couple of rows in here. Let's add this into new lines as well. And add in some classes here to specify the styling. And then we just want a button in here, which is going to be a submit button. And we just want to add in some classes here to style it up as well. So we want to make it indigo 500 and 600, sorry, and however we want to increase it by 100. And we want to add in some text color and font bold and some spacing as well. And round it. And then you just call that send. So there you go. That's how we're going to have the interface looking like throughout this video. And we also want to make sure we have the model specified inside here. And that should be a string. And we also want to have in here a function which is going to be send the message, where we ask for some text to be passed through. And in here, what we want to do is we want to store the message in the database using the message relationship we created. And what we can do is we can just pass through the information here and specify this is from a user. Just like that. And we want to make sure this is a void function so that that's added in. And then we want to respond to the message using ChatGPT. So inside this respond method, we want to make sure it is a void method because we're not returning anything. And in here, we want to have a list of all the messages we have sent in a specific conversation. So we just want to say conversation messages. And we want to map through those messages. Make sure we specify this as the model messages as well. And in this closure we're going to be creating, we want to set some specific data. We also want to pass this to an array. So let's head into this closure now. Inside this closure, we want to return a specified role, and we also want to go ahead and make sure that we pass through the message. Just like that. And then we also want to make sure that we later on are going to set the conversation title. So we just want to check if the title is null. And if it is null, in that case, we just want to go ahead and make sure we, in this case, set the title. We're going to do that later on though. And we also then want to send a message to OpenAI, which is the previous messages, including the current one. We want to make sure we chat to OpenAI, and we want to create a stream one so that we can actually stream the message. In here, we want to pass through the model, which we are specifying in here. So in the case of model, it's not specified. We just want to use GPT 3.5 Turbo. And messages should just be all messages passed through. Just like that. And we also, in this case, want to make sure that we have an answer set to null. And the answer will basically be what we're going to be streaming to the client side. So if you go in here now, we can then later on set the answer. However, first we want to iterate through the message and also set the entire message to null, which is the message we're going to be putting through to the database. So we want to go through stream as response, entire message. We want to concatenate those in so that we have the individual message added in. We want to set responding to false. And we want to set this answer, and in this case, to the content. We want to set entire message and concatenate that there to the answer. And we then want to stream this using the wire stream function to response and pass through content as this answer. Then if we go down here, we can then say this answer is going to be equal to the entire message. And then further down, we can basically store the response in the database. And this will be from the AI, so we want to make sure that we set the messages here and create it, just like we've done before. And then here we just want to pass through this answer as the content, or in this case you can put through the entire message. And what I say this is the AI that's responding there. And in this case, after that, we just want to dispatch an event, which is going to be reloading the messages. And the way we're going to reload the messages is by just creating a listener up here. So we can just call this message added and set this to load messages function. So we just now need to say this dispatch message added, and then it will reload the messages. So what we want to go ahead and do is create a template in here and then say X if, in this case first, temporary message, which is the message we're sending through, so that we're loading that immediately. And we just want to make sure this is justify start. So this is the message the user sends. Just like that. And that will basically just allow us to send the message there. We then also want to specify the message we are retrieving, which is going to be only allowed to be shown if sending is true. And then here we're just going to pass through an li, where we're going to say flex and justify end. And then we're going to have a class in here where we're going to stream the response, and we want to make sure we have a class in here of background indigo 500, text wide, max width large, padding free, rounded, large, and pass-through chat container as well. And then what we want to make sure in here is we want to make sure we also put through the answer. And then say the AI as well as responding as the profile picture. We also want to say X on submit the prevent. And then here, what we want to go ahead and do is we want to say temporary message is going to be set to the text. Sending is going to be true. We then want to say wire the send message pass through the text, and then we want to go into the response that we're retrieving here. So just like if you're doing an AJAX request, you can just go in and go through the response here. Inside this response, we can then go ahead and ensure we have the response sent through, and also making sure that we are setting the text here. So actually we're going to move all of this into the response as well. So in here we're just going to say wire dot respond, and then in there we're going to go through to the then method in the closure, and in the closure we're going to do all of what I just wrote through that function. So we're going to send sending to false and temporary message to null, because by that point we've already reloaded the messages by using the message added. So all of it would have been done then. We would have created the API request. It should all be fixed then. Outside of that, we also at some point want to make sure that we reset the text in here as well. Okay, so let's set in here and see how it works. So just send a message and see what it says. And we're getting a duplicate here. So let's just go ahead and delete all our messages in the database, just like that. And if we then say hi, it's responding. Perfect. But we currently have an issue with our own message here, which is a bit problematic. So let's just go ahead and take a look at why this is happening. So this is happening because we need to actually say the X model needs to be specified here. So if you go ahead and delete that, type again. There we go. It's streaming the message. We can say, tell me a story. And it's writing. We have two issues here. We are still having the old message added on to the new one when we're streaming. And then secondly, we are having an issue with resetting the form upon sending the message. So let's set this to null. And then we also want to make sure that inside the chatbot component later on, we need to essentially specify that we set stream to null upon everything being done. But let's look at that in a minute. For now, let's just see if we can actually get to send a message and clear the form. And check if it retrieves the first message we previously said. And it seems like it does. There we go. Alright, so that's working great. So what we want to go into now is let's take a look inside here and see how ChatGPT Model 4 works. And it's writing some PHP code. So it's currently generating that. And at the moment it looks a bit weird. It doesn't look readable at all. So later we're going to be adding Markdown to just make it be more readable. However, at first, let's head in here. Add this at the end instead, actually, just because we want to make sure it's after all the requests have been done. And then let's head into chatbot. Create a function in here where we're going to clear the state. And inside here, we just need to say this responding to false and set this answer to null. And what we want to go ahead and do in here is just called wire clear state. So we know the message has been generated by this point because we're inside the then method. We know that the message has been send an event through as well, so it should be best place to do it in here. So let's go ahead and say, tell me a story again, and see what happens. And you can see it's generating a story, which is great. It works fine so far. And let's see, and another one. And there we go. So now we're clearing the state upon sending the message, and we can have multiple conversations with ChatGPT in here, switching between the models if need be as well. And yeah, so let's go ahead and also look at how we can, for example, get some of the PHP code edited and highlighted. But first, let's generate the title. So let's head in and say generate title. And let's create a function in here that's private, where we just say generate title. And in here, we just want to pass through and return a string. So we want to say, in this case, we want to say prompt, and this prompt is going to be in here the role of the system, in this case us, and content should be generate a conversation title. And I've made a small prompt here to generate that. Alright, so with that sorted, let's go ahead and basically pass this through to ChatGPT and also give it the previous messages, which we're going to pass through to the title here. So we're going to have the messages pass through, and we're going to have the prompt in an array pass through in here. And we're also going to return a string. So what we should be able to do now is just return this. Again, we need to just have some checks in here that we are getting the response through properly. So let's wait for that for now and just quickly create the ChatGPT response, just like that. And here we just want to pass through model 3.5, which should be sufficient for this task, since we don't want to waste money on this. And we also are going to be putting through, in this case, the messages. And then inside the response, we just want to have some safety check here in case something goes wrong. So we want to say if response is empty with the choices, we then want to, in this case, say choices. If it is an empty type. And response choices, we want to get the content in there. And we want to set the title response, in this case, to choices, at the end of the choices. And we want to return the title response. In the case that this somehow is empty, we then want to return either general discussion or new chat, depending on whatever you want to call it. So I'm just going to call this new chat instead, so that will be the title in the case there's an issue. Just like that. So what we should be able to do now is you should be able to generate the title and retrieve that in this title property. And then we should be able to set the title. So what we can do is just reach for this conversation title. And we can also set the title using the JavaScript, this JS function. So let's go ahead and make sure we are setting the title for the page. In here we just want to say title. And we want to make sure we have this method as well, instead of using the word title in there. Just like that. And then what we want to go ahead and do is then update this using the conversation in here. So this conversation update title property. And that should do it there. So if you go ahead and delete all the conversations, make sure you've set them to no. Let's just say, hi, how are you doing? And we need to add title to the conversation model as well. So let's go ahead and do that quickly. I'm just going to set guarded in here to an empty array so that it will allow us to do it. And then let's type in a message again. And it's generating there, and you can see the title is also there. So we now have the ability to set titles and to send messages as well. So let's look at how we can then format it as well. Inside the chat component, also make sure we have the title set upon loading the page. So let's set in title and the return view function where we render it. Just like that. And we also want to make sure we do this inside the chat.php file, obviously. So in there, we want to just set title to this title. And then we want to say public string title is equal to new chat by default. And upon mounting, we want to retrieve the conversation title if it's set. There we go. So that should basically set the title as well. So with the title set, let's go ahead and see if we can actually go in slowly and start working on formatting the PHP code that ChatGPT may be generating to us. Use the Laravel Markdown tool here, where we can go ahead and compose the required. And what we need to do after having required it, we just need to install the code highlighter that you recommend using. So let's go ahead and install that. Then let's make sure we also publish the vendor file here. And let's make sure that we also go down into our chatbot file. And in here, when we're loading the messages, we basically want to map through it and then set each conversation to Markdown instead. So what we need to do is we need to go ahead in here and say, well, first of all, we also want to get the oldest messages here. So we want to go ahead and make sure we do that, and we want to map through each individual message and then set the content of that message to be a Markdown. And we can essentially just do this using app markdown renderer class, and then set the theme of the code highlighting and set this as HTML. And then we will basically return it. And now if we go in, we should be able to write a conversation with ChatGPT using Markdown code, just like that. So you can see that this is now working perfectly fine. And that's what we're doing basically in the original application there. So let's see how it works in here now. So if you go and take a look, let's see how some PHP code will be looking like that. And it won't render before we have retrieved the message, not while it's writing it, unfortunately, because that's a bit more tricky to get working. But we can basically get it to show the code upon being sent, not when it's sending. Then let's go ahead and set Shiki to overflex scroll and padding as well, and some rounded and some marking as well. So we have some spacing there, just like that. Looks a bit better now. We could also go ahead and set some shadow small in there. Alright, let's go ahead and make sure we also set the model and pass that through to the function as well. So at the moment, I don't think we have actually set it, so let's go ahead and double check that now. If you say this model, let's see if it actually works or not. So I'm just going to type in anything here, and yeah, we basically haven't even passed through the model details to the backend. So at the moment, we need to do that inside the chatbot component. So if we head into the select component, we just need to specify the wire model in here. .live. And we just want to set the model. And if we just say anything in here, it will then specify which model we've selected, which is perfect. So we now know that this is working. So that's actually all for this video. Thank you very much for watching this video, and please hit the like and the subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one. Do let me know if you have any questions as well, and comment them down below in the comment section.